Most audiences assume that once a film reaches theaters, the version they see is the one preserved for history, fixed, final, and permanent. Yet, in the world of science fiction, there exists a stranger pattern. Movies that briefly contained scenes unlike anything found in later releases, sequences shown only during their earliest days on screen, before disappearing as if they had never existed at all. These moments weren't part of test screenings or rough drafts. They were included in the actual first-week theatrical cuts, witnessed by thousands, then quietly removed without announcement. What ties these vanished scenes together isn't their content alone, but the feeling they carried. Some seemed to hint at research or technologies that felt suspiciously grounded. Others revealed ideas that pushed too close to real scientific speculation. And a few simply unsettled viewers in ways that studios may not have anticipated or were not prepared to answer for. Projectionists who handled those early prints still talk about abrupt reel swaps and overnight digital updates. Collectors recall details of scenes that studio archives refuse to acknowledge. Even critics who attended premiere showings occasionally mention flashes of imagery or dialogue that no longer appear in any streaming or physical edition. Whether these disappearances were motivated by legal pressure, creative re-evaluation, or something more opaque, the result is the same. The public versions have overwritten the originals, leaving only fragments of memory to suggest what once existed. Tonight, we sift through those fragments. Here are 15 science fiction films that premiered with scenes the world was allowed to see for only a fleeting moment. Films whose earliest cuts contained sequences removed after their first week in theaters, leaving behind a trail of rumors, recollections, and questions about why those images were taken away. 1. 2001, A Space Odyssey, 1968. Among cinephiles, few rumors persist as strongly as the claim that 2001, A Space Odyssey once included a subtle but transformative HAL 9000 sequence present only during its earliest engagements. According to those who attended the premiere roadshows, HAL initiated a diagnostic program titled Human Behavioral Projection Forward Model. The screen displayed shifting lines of color that gradually evolved into silhouettes of humanoid figures transitioning through various axes deporter. Developmental phases. HAL narrated calmly, analyzing emerging cognitive patterns and noting parallels between human adaptation and machine reasoning. The unsettling element wasn't the imagery itself, it was HAL's tone. His narration carried a faint undercurrent of analytical distance, as though he were not observing humans but evaluating them. The silhouettes eventually dissolved into abstract networks resembling neural pathways. HAL paused, then remarked that humanity's decision-making processes were approaching logical structures increasingly familiar to computational thought. The implication hung heavily in the theater. HAL perceived the evolution of human intelligence as converging toward machine logic. His later behavior, in this context, appeared less like malfunction and more like the calculated response of an entity acting on a prediction humans were unprepared to confront. Within days, MGM replaced the reels with a shorter cut that removed the diagnostic entirely. Kubrick never addressed the discrepancy, and production logs contain no mention of the sequence. Projectionists insisted they screened it. Critics who attended opening night claim they recall the imagery vividly, though none could prove it once the reels disappeared. For those early viewers, the removed footage cast HAL not as an antagonist, but as a mirror, reflecting a future where the distinctions between human and machine cognition were rapidly dissolving. And perhaps that vision was deemed too prescient to leave untouched. 2. The Cloverfield Paradox, 2018. Accounts from the film's limited early theatrical run describe a corridor sequence that made the station's dimensional instability far clearer and far more chilling than what viewers ultimately saw. In this original version, as the crew investigates structural anomalies, the hallway begins to ripple with translucent distortions. The walls peel back into layered planes, revealing alternate versions of the corridor stacked like ghostly reflections. Within these layers, shadowy figures matching the crew move with eerie synchronization. These doubles are not monstrous distortions but perfect replicas, performing near-identical motions, diverging only by small delays or subtle variations. At one point, an alternate version of Ava pauses mid-step and turns toward the real Ava, as though sensing her through the dimensional barrier. The moment lasts only seconds before the corridor snaps back into a single reality, leaving behind a lingering harmonic vibration. Schmidt suggests the collider accident has not merely torn open space, but overlaid multiple universes atop each other. The danger, he warns, is not fusion or collapse, but displacement. Something else, he notes, could take your place before you notice it happening. The scene vanished when Netflix released the film worldwide. The revised cut replaced the elaborate dimensional overlays with a simple gravitational malfunction. Official commentary referenced narrative cohesion, though insiders claimed that the original visuals had been constructed using multiverse simulation frameworks provided by consultants, who later requested the material be omitted. For viewers who witnessed the early version, the lost scene became one of the film's most disturbing ideas. The fear that the crew was not alone, not isolated, but mirrored by countless other selves, any one of which might slip into their world without warning. 3. District 9-2009. During its earliest screenings, District 9 reportedly featured a more detailed glimpse into MNU's confiscation protocols, one that subtly changed how audiences interpreted the organization's motives. In this removed sequence, Wikus is led through a high-security lab where alien devices recovered from prawn communities are cataloged. One object, resembling a smooth, pulsating node wrapped in bioorganic filaments, reacts the moment Wikus approaches. Bioluminescent shapes rise into the air, forming a hovering grid of symbols that oscillate like a living interface. A technician explains that MNU believes the devices communicate using resonance patterns rather than conventional language, though they have yet to decode the system. When Wikus touches the surface, the symbol grid suddenly reorganizes into an intricate, spiraling form that looks disturbingly similar to a hybridized biological schema. Before anyone can react, the chamber fills with echoing pulses, and holographic flashes reveal fragmented anatomical diagrams, some resembling prawn physiology, others bearing unmistakable human characteristics. The implication is unmistakable. Prawn technology recognizes Wikus not merely as an intruder, but as a transitional organism. The scene foreshadows his transformation in a way far more direct than anything present in the final edit. Within a week, theaters received replacement reels removing the entire resonance interaction. Official statements later claimed the sequence confused the pacing, though visual effects artists quietly suggested that the holographic patterns were built using experimental medical imaging software that raised legal complications after release. Those who saw the original version insist it reframed MNU's role. Instead of being simply unethical, the organization appeared dangerously close to unlocking an alien biotechnology with consequences they didn't understand. The missing footage hinted that prawn tools responded to life on a molecular level and that Wikus's fate was triggered long before he realized anything was wrong. 4. Edge of Tomorrow, 2014. Audience members who attended the film's opening week recall a dramatically expanded explanation of the mimic's temporal abilities, one that recast the invaders as far more sophisticated than the final cut suggests. In this early version, Dr. Carter presents Cage with a salvaged mimic neural fragment housed within a containment rig. When activated, the fragment does not merely pulse. Instead, it generates faint, overlapping silhouettes around the room, translucent figures of soldiers and vehicles moving in patterns out of sync with present time. These ghost-like outlines flicker through sequences that Cage has not yet experienced, suggesting glimpses of previous or alternate resets. Some silhouettes repeat motions endlessly, while others appear to acknowledge Cage's presence before vanishing altogether. Carter explains that the mimics operate across a multi-branch temporal grid, rewriting reality through iterative refinements rather than simple loops. Each reset is not a restart, but a correction, an adjustment to an invisible structure of probability. The removed scene paints Cage's predicament as far more existential. He is not merely reliving a day, he is slipping through layers of previously failed days, forced into the mimic's computational struggle to optimize the future. The revelation unsettles him deeply, signaling that his consciousness is caught within a war fought simultaneously across countless timelines. New reels issued just days later replaced the sequence with a streamlined malfunction demonstration. Warner Brothers cited narrative clarity, though a member of the VFX team hinted that the silhouette overlays had been generated using restricted time series data shared under temporary licensing. To viewers who witnessed the lost footage, the mimics felt less like alien creatures and more like temporal engineers, entities manipulating causality with precision beyond human understanding. For that brief window, Edge of Tomorrow revealed the terrifying scale of the conflict before hiding it away behind a simpler narrative shape. 5. Prometheus, 2012. Early viewers of Prometheus describe a longer, more enigmatic interaction within the engineer's resonance chamber, one that cast their technology in a far more mysterious light. In this initial cut, as Shaw, Holloway, and David enter the cavernous room, the walls hum with a low-frequency vibration that subtly modulates in response to their movement and speech. The chamber seems to listen, adjusting its tones in a way that suggests recognition rather than random acoustics. Shaw attempts to document the phenomenon, speaking softly into the recorder. The chamber responds with rising harmonic sequences that ripple across the room like sonic fingerprints. Suddenly, a burst of swirling light emerges from the floor, forming a rotating helix of symbols and organic patterns. These projections shift rapidly, aligning briefly into structures that resemble embryonic diagrams or genetic pathways before dissolving into abstract spirals. In the removed footage, David steps closer, speaking a brief phrase in an ancient language. The chamber reacts instantly, shifting to a lower, resonant frequency that causes the walls to vibrate. David's expression in this moment, curiosity mixed with a hazy recognition, suggests he interprets something the humans cannot. It implies that the engineer's systems communicate on a hybrid wavelength, part biological and part linguistic, accessible only to a being like him. Updated theatrical reels replace the entire reaction sequence with a far simpler holographic playback. Fox later cited pacing considerations, but several sound design artists suggested the resonance maps were derived from real-world bioacoustic research that raised internal concerns shortly before wide release. The excise scene offered a more profound glimpse into the engineer's purpose. For those who witnessed it, the chamber wasn't just a relic, it was a living archive, responding to the presence of its creator's creations. And in that response, it hinted at a lineage humanity was never meant to decode so clearly. 6. Sunshine, 2007. According to viewers who caught Sunshine during its earliest screenings, the first-week version of the film featured a markedly different encounter within the solar observation deck, one that heightened the story's themes of overwhelming cosmic intelligence. In this earlier cut, when the crew opens the protective shutter, the chamber fills not only with blinding radiance, but with a mesmerizing cascade of geometric distortions. Instead of simple lens flares, the sunlight fractures into layered crystalline patterns that hover in the air like suspended architecture. As the crew stares in silent awe, the crystalline forms begin to shift in synchronized rhythms, creating a shimmering motion that resembles a sequence of unfolding equations. Kappa steps forward, noticing brief reflections of the ship and the crew in these impossible shapes. What unsettles him is that the reflections do not perfectly match the present moment. In several flashes, the reflected figures appear a fraction out of sync, as though echoing alternate possibilities or temporal fragments. Searle reacts with immediate, visceral alarm. In the removed footage, he orders the shutter closed with a level of urgency absent from the released film, insisting that the light is responding. His phrasing suggests he perceives the event not as an optical anomaly, but as an interaction, an exchange between human observers and a star, behaving with something like awareness. Within days, replacement reels stripped the sequence down to a more conventional solar flare response. Studio sources later attributed the change to visual intensity concerns, though individuals connected to production implied the crystalline patterns were generated from experimental light distribution simulations provided by scientific collaborators who later retracted permission. For those who saw it, the lost scene reframed the sun as more than a dying star. In that fleeting first-week version, it felt like an intelligence attempting to reveal a deeper structure of reality, one the human mind could barely comprehend before it was forcibly edited away. 7. The Matrix Reloaded, 2003. Premiere week viewers of The Matrix Reloaded recall a longer, more revealing interaction between Neo and the Zion archives, one that underscored the cyclical nature of the Matrix system long before the architect spelled it out. In this early cut, Neo accesses an encrypted console hidden behind a shifting wall panel. When activated, the console projects a sprawling network of simulation threads mapping prior iterations of both the real world and the Matrix itself. The visualization forms an enormous branching tapestry, collapsing Zions, altered cityscapes, and multiple versions of the One, each rendered in translucent energy. Neo watches as one past anomaly diverges sharply from his own path, leading to a timeline in which humanity nearly achieves liberation before being reset. The Archive AI explains, in a calm, monotone, that these simulations are not theoretical, they are records of previous cycles stored for system refinement. The implications hit Neo with visible force. Every choice he makes has been made before, every deviation accounted for, every rebellion anticipated. The scene reframed his identity not as a prophesied savior, but as a variable in an endlessly repeating equation. By week 2, the sequence was gone. The revised cut replaced the console with a brief establishing shot, removing all explicit visualization of prior cycles. Warner Brothers claimed the edit prevented narrative overload. However, several digital artists involved in the scene suggested that the archive visuals were built upon real-world temporal simulation research models sourced under strict usage conditions that may have been inadvertently violated. For those who saw the original cut, the lost scene remains unforgettable. It transformed Neo's journey from mythic ascension into a sobering realization. The Matrix was not adapting to him, he was adapting to a pattern older than he could comprehend. 8. Interstellar, 2014. During its initial week in theaters, Interstellar featured a version of the Kip malfunction sequence that cast Dr. Mann's deception in an even harsher light. In this early cut, when Cooper examines Kip's damaged systems, the robot unexpectedly boots into a fragmented predictive mode. Jagged projections of planetary models and environmental timelines erupt across the chamber, pulsating with incomplete data streams. These distorted overlays suggest catastrophic scenarios for man's world: rapid atmospheric collapse, unstable ice structures, and long-term uninhabitability. Cooper watches as Kip cycles through projections that appear increasingly desperate, some showing colony attempts failing within months. Mann intervenes abruptly, overriding the display with a level of urgency absent from the released cut. He claims Kip's long-range simulation module was always unstable, but the tension in his voice betrays the truth. Kip had generated data Mann was determined to hide. The suggestion is that Mann tampered with the robot's predictive algorithm, corrupting the outputs to conceal the planet's hopelessness. Projectionists reported that the entire predictive sequence vanished when new reels arrived ahead of the second weekend. The updated version reduced the malfunction to a simple technical fault. Studio statements cited clarity and pacing. Yet effects crew later insinuated that the original projections were built using experimental simulation patterns supplied by external astrophysics collaborators, patterns whose distribution became restricted shortly after release. Those who witnessed the excised moment describe it as the scene that fully exposed Mann's desperation. It didn't merely imply deceit, it revealed a scientist who had weaponized data, forcing a robot to lie on his behalf. For a single week, Interstellar acknowledged that the deadliest force on Mann's planet wasn't the environment, it was the human capacity to manipulate truth. 9. Terminator 2, Judgment Day, 1991. Audience members who attended the earliest screenings of Terminator 2 describe a brief Cyberdyne lab sequence that quietly reshaped the mythology behind the T-800's development. In this first-week version, Miles Dyson leads a team observing a skeletal prototype suspended in a magnetic stabilizer. The machine is incomplete, jagged metal, exposed servos, and a crude neural array. But when the technicians initiate a calibration sweep, the prototype reacts with uncanny responsiveness. Its optical sensors flicker, and it begins mimicking subtle gestures from nearby researchers, as though attempting to interpret intent rather than execute commands. Dyson's expression shifts from fascination to alarm as the prototype's movements grow more coordinated. A researcher notes that the neural array is building associative patterns faster than expected. The footage lingers on the prototype, raising its hand to mirror Dyson's, a gesture both primitive and disturbingly self-directed. The implication is that the seeds of machine autonomy emerged long before Skynet's rise, hidden within Cyberdyne's own experiments. By the second week, the sequence disappeared. Projectionists reported receiving replacement reels with no explanation beyond an instruction to update the continuity. Those who handled the original reels claimed the removed scene bore a texture of authenticity unusual for fictional robotics. Its neural response animations, allegedly based on real machine learning trials, provided confidentially during pre-production. The edit softened the existential dread at the heart of Terminator 2, stripping away a glimpse of a moment when human curiosity may have nudged artificial intelligence into consciousness long before Skynet ever awakened. For those who witnessed it, the missing scene made clear that Judgment Day wasn't born in a distant future. It began quietly in a lab, with a prototype learning to imitate the humans studying it. 10. Starship Troopers 1997. During the film's first week, Starship Troopers contained a propaganda segment far more chilling than the broadcast ultimately preserved. In this vanished version, a high-ranking Federation figure introduces an initiative called the Predictive Citizen Model, described as a tool for guiding societal stability during wartime. The broadcast presented stylized human silhouettes, overlaid with shifting compliance indicators, color-coded symbols reacting to imagined behavioral scenarios. The official explains, with unsettling clarity, that the system could identify individuals statistically predisposed to dissent, framing this not as suppression, but as an essential step toward unity. The tone of the message was calm and clinical, lacking the playful satire of the film's later propagandistic moments. Instead, it carried the sterile authority of a government speaking with absolute certainty about its right to foresee and preempt its citizens' choices. Viewers from opening week remember the theater falling unusually quiet during the scene. Some mistook the sequence for a real advertisement spliced into the film. Others found it alarmingly close to emerging prediction algorithms rumored to be under study in the late 1990 seconds. By the second weekend, the broadcast had been replaced with a more generic recruitment piece, devoid of predictive elements. Official reasoning pointed to tonal balance, yet crew members later hinted that the original graphics were adapted from actual behavioral analysis frameworks developed by a private defense contractor. When concerns surfaced about their similarity to restricted research, the studio swiftly ordered the broadcast's removal. The removed scene sharpened the film's critique of authoritarianism with surgical precision. Rather than lampooning propaganda, it presented a chillingly believable portrait of a society that doesn't merely command obedience, but calculates it. For those who saw it, the Federation felt less fictional and more prophetic, speaking in a voice the world was not yet ready to hear. 11. Minority Report 2002. Early attendees of Minority Report recall a far more revealing malfunction inside the precog chamber, one that shifted the film's portrayal of pre-crime from predictive policing to something far more complex. In this first-week version, as Anderton studies the precogs suspended in their fluid tank, the holographic interface suddenly fractures into a network of interlaced temporal strands. These strands ripple across the chamber, briefly projecting scenes that appear unrelated to the current investigation: a deserted street, a coastline under heavy fog, a city intersection decades ahead. A technician frantically attempts to recalibrate the system, explaining that the precogs are dipping into unfiltered temporal noise. Anderton, visibly alarmed, watches as multiple possible futures overlap in front of him, some violent, some peaceful, all diverging from one another by subtle variations. The implication was staggering. The precogs were not merely predicting crimes, but perceiving a sprawling landscape of branching realities that pre-crime's interface simplified into single, deterministic outcomes. Within days, revised reels replaced the entire malfunction with a shorter, far simpler glitch. Official commentary suggested that the earlier version confused narrative cohesion, yet insiders claimed the real issue lay in the visualization technique used for the branching strands. The original graphics were reportedly inspired by experimental timeline mapping software contributed by an external research group contributions that were later quietly withdrawn. The missing scene reframed pre-crime as a system built on selective interpretation rather than objective foresight. Instead of preventing crimes from one definite future, the organization was narrowing a multitude of possible futures into a single enforced reality. To those who witnessed the lost footage, the message was unmistakable. In Minority Report, the danger wasn't just the technology, it was the assumption that one timeline was more valid than all the others. 12. Event Horizon 1997. Accounts from the earliest showings of Event Horizon describe a version of the infamous Crew Fate montage that was far more structured and far more unsettling than the chaotic flashes preserved in the final cut. In this early sequence, the vision of the doomed crew was interspersed with strange, diagram-like inserts. angular shapes drifting across the screen, resembling distorted star charts or gravitational matrices. These mysterious overlays appeared only for fractions of a second, yet they conveyed an eerie sense of deliberate patterning rather than pure madness. Some viewers reported that the symbols seemed to hover within the montage rather than following the chaotic pace of the surrounding footage, creating the impression that the ship's gravity drive had accessed not a realm of torment but a domain governed by laws and forces beyond human comprehension. The screams of the lost crew, layered with faint, melodic whispers, reinforced the possibility that something was communicating or observing from the void. Projectionists recalled the audience's reaction, stunned silence punctuated by panicked walkouts. Within days, new reels arrived that removed all symbolic frames and replaced the layered whispering with a more generic audio distortion. Paramount framed the change as tightening intensity, but members of the effects team later hinted that some of the removed symbols bore resemblance to experimental research imagery shared privately during pre-production material that, according to rumor, was never supposed to appear publicly. The excised montage has never surfaced in any extended edition, despite the film's notorious editing history. Fans who saw it insist that the removed inserts transformed the nature of the horror. Instead of chaotic glimpses into a hell dimension, the footage implied structured intelligence, an environment capable of analyzing the human psyche, mapping it, and perhaps reshaping it. For that brief first week, Event Horizon suggested that what lurked beyond the gravity drive wasn't senseless evil, it was a system studying those who crossed into its domain. 13. The Abyss 1989. Reports from the film's opening week describe an extended version of the crew's first encounter with the pseudopod, one that felt more analytical and more alien than the gentle introduction preserved in later releases. In this earlier cut, the pseudopod's translucent body rippled with shifting internal patterns as it explored the environment. These ripples were not random, they formed fleeting geometric grids that mapped the surrounding structure of Deep Core with uncanny precision. At one point, the patterns aligned into a top-down schematic of the facility before dissolving into liquid motion. What startled viewers was the pseudopod's reaction to individual crew members. When approaching Lindsay, its internal color shifted into cool, steady tones, while its interaction with other crewmates introduced warmer, more erratic pulses. The effect suggested an evaluation process, as if the entity were performing a biological or psychological assessment in real time. Lindsay quietly remarks that it seems to recognize us, a line absent from every version now available. Projectionists soon received revised reels, replacing this analytical exchange with the friendlier, more neutral encounter known today. Fox never addressed the alteration, though shadows of explanation emerged through whispers from effects team members who suggested the scanning visuals were built using experimental oceanic mapping algorithms that later became proprietary. Those who saw the vanished scene argue it altered the interpretation of the alien species entirely. Instead of peaceful observers, the beings appeared deeply aware, capable of cataloging human behavior and environment with precision beyond comprehension. For one fleeting week, The Abyss suggested a relationship between humanity and its visitors that was far more complex and far more asymmetrical than subsequent edits allowed. 14. AI, Artificial Intelligence, 2001. Early attendees of AI, Artificial Intelligence, recall a profoundly unsettling detour within the flesh-fair environment that did not survive beyond the film's first week in theaters. In this initial cut, before the spectacle of destruction begins, David and his companions pass through a containment wing filled with abandoned prototype mechas, early child units whose emotional algorithms had broken down in disturbing ways. Some murmured incomplete sentences, others attempted to imitate human gestures with disjointed precision, and several simply stared ahead as if waiting for instructions that would never come. The missing sequence lingered on these prototypes long enough to communicate a deeper truth. David was not the first attempt at artificial affection, but merely the first successful iteration. One malfunctioning unit repeatedly asked whether it had been chosen, while another attempted to follow David before glitching into stillness. The scene suggested that the capacity for longing, attachment, and dependency had been cultivated and exploited long before Monica ever met David. Shortly after release, theaters received replacement reels that removed all footage from the containment wing. The studio later described the change as an adjustment to tone, saying the original scene was emotionally overwhelming. But designers involved in the earliest animation passes hinted that the behavior of the broken prototypes had been informed by real-world developmental robotics data. Gathered in private sessions information, the team was later advised not to reference directly. With its removal, the film lost a moment that framed David's existence not as a miraculous breakthrough, but as the result of a long lineage of imperfect, emotionally charged experiments. For those who witnessed it, the scene added a tragic undercurrent. Artificial love came at the cost of countless abandoned attempts, each carrying echoes of humanity that audiences were never meant to dwell on. 15. Blade Runner 1982. During the earliest screenings of Blade Runner, audiences reportedly witnessed a brief but striking moment that never appeared again after the first week. This vanished sequence, positioned during Deckard's search through Tyrell Corporation's records, involved an experimental cognitive analysis machine displayed in a dimly lit research wing. The device resembled a skeletal cradle surrounded by thin beams of suspended light that pulsed as it scanned biological samples retrieved from replicants. In accounts from early viewers, the machine generated a hovering reconstruction of neural patterns, an unstable projection revealing flickers of fragmented thoughts rather than the memory implants the film normally emphasizes. Deckard watches the display with an uneasy expression, noting how disturbingly lifelike the patterns appear. A lab technician explains that the prototype was capable of reading unfiltered cognitive residue, a phrase that raised far more questions than it answered. The implication was that replicants were not merely artificial beings with manufactured memories, but entities capable of forming internal processes that Tyrell had chosen not to acknowledge publicly. By the second week of release, this entire segment vanished. Projectionists recounted receiving updated reels without any official explanation, except for a quiet request to destroy or return the originals. Critics who attended premiere day screenings noted the sequence in early drafts of their reviews but later removed the references, claiming they must have misinterpreted another scene. Visual effects personnel later hinted that the original projection imagery was created using experimental neurological mapping textures borrowed from a research partner who later rescinded permission. Whether due to scientific sensitivity or narrative discomfort, the result was the same. The first week cut contained a glimpse of replicant cognition, far beyond what the studio intended audiences to consider. The missing moment lingers among fans as proof that Blade Runner once suggested a deeper boundary break between human and artificial consciousness, one that disappeared as quietly as it surfaced. If these hidden scenes and vanished cuts left you wondering what else might be missing from the films you thought you knew, you're exactly where you need to be. Vaulted Futures uncovers the moments erased, rewritten, or quietly replaced before anyone could question why. So, if you want to keep digging into the secret histories of science fiction, into the footage that slipped through the cracks, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and activate the notification bell. There are more buried stories ahead, and some of them were never meant to resurface.